Hello, welcome. This is the first and the only magazine show with the latest news and information from the UK energy scene. Oil or diesel, wind or solar. It's all here in the next 30 minutes. Welcome to the UK Energy Show. So, this week we're talking about COP. COP30 got underway in Brazil with a clarion call from the hosts. We need roadmaps, they say, which will enable humankind in a fair and planned manner to overcome its dependence on fossil fuels, halt and reverse deforestation, and mobilise resources to achieve those goals. We'll discuss what's been discussed in Brazil so far. Also this week, diesel prices are on the rise again, particularly at the pump in your town. Why should that be when the world has a glut of crude oil? And never mind the future, wind power has already saved the UK over £100 billion. We hear from a former market trader turned academic. That's all a little bit later on. Joining me to discuss this week's events, Julian Keites from the Flux Markets. Julian, welcome to you. Let's get into some of the news of the week, shall we? COP30. Now, COP30 is the United Nations Climate Change Conference. It takes place in Brazil from the 10th to the 21st of November this year. These climate change conferences take place every year. They're the world's only multilateral decision-making forum on climate change that brings together almost every country on Earth.
And it's great to have the head of state so committed with this COP. And I believe this was a really wonderful opening session. Then I have to thank here in front of all of you, all the delegations for the fantastic agreement that they reached regarding the agenda yesterday night, late at night. And this agreement is, I believe, going not only to allow us to start working today already very intensively, but it will also allow us to explain to the world why these additional issues that had been raised really matter.
That's a clip from the opening press conference. So, Julian, let's talk about COP. Let's go back.
Yeah.
What are they all about?
Yeah, I think that's a really important place to start. So just think COP30, as it's often referred to, COP29 last year. It's the 30th annual United Nations Climate Change Conference. And it's taking place, as you said, it started on Monday and it runs all the way through to the 21st of November. So roughly 2 weeks. And it typically, right at the end, it doesn't always end on the date that they think it's going to end because there's a bit of wrangling and gerrymandering and deciding actually what's going to be achieved and announced. So on and around the 21st of this month, and as you say, Belém, which of course is the gateway to the Amazon. So this year, hosted in Brazil, and I'm sure they've chosen that site for a specific reason, deforestation, so on and so forth. So this global summit brings together nearly 195 countries, the world's countries together. Okay, collectively, they're going to negotiate and advance climate action, aiming to limit global warming and adapt to climate impacts, whatever might be happening. And of course, this just in the last few weeks, we've had Jamaica, the hurricane there, the strongest hurricane ever landing in the Atlantic basin. Okay, so again, climate activists would say that's absolutely down to climate change. The Conference of Parties, COP, Conference of Parties, is the main decision-making body, okay, for the UN framework of Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, which was established back in 1992. So it's been running for a long, long time, and they created a global framework to address climate change and impacts. So COP30 builds on 30 years of climate negotiations, including landmark agreements like the 1997 Kyoto Protocol, which had some real issues in being able to allow countries to agree because it was a more draconian approach. You will do this. So actually, the Paris Agreement that's often referred to, 2015, COP21, I think it was, that decided that actually we would lead this on an individual country basis, NDCs, and allow countries to decide what they're going to do, and actually celebrate the UK. The UK really embraced that, in actual fact, and has led the charge. I believe. Okay, so that's a really positive thing for the UK. We should congratulate ourselves about that. And what's this all about, the Paris Agreement specifically? It's about limiting, and you can see on the screen here, limiting climate change from pre-industrial levels. That's 1850 to 1900. Climate change annual temperature changes to 1.5 degrees to 2 degrees, somewhere between that range. And as you can see on the chart here, and we'll play it over the course as we're discussing COP30 here, at the moment, we really are threatening 1.5 to 2 degrees. And this is, the limit is due, that maximum limit is due by 2030. We want to limit climate change below 2 degrees come 2030.
But that ambition, which was set, as you said, and reiterated many times, looks like it's going to miss the target. As a globe, we're going to miss the target.
Yeah, some people say, because it's a 10-year average, so we're not 10 years beyond, of course.
Yeah.
So, and climate change, we have spikes and in terms of temperature and reductions as well, as predicted by climate change scientists. So we're not really there to say, undeniably, we have breached it, but it does look like last year was the warmest year on record. So what are we going to do about it? That's the key thing, really.
Yeah. What are you hearing from your colleagues and the market generally about the Americans not being there? I mean, we know Donald Trump is a climate, if not a denier. He's not a fan of climate change.
Absolutely.
He doesn't really believe in it. He's not sending a delegation. Does that really matter?
Yeah, I think it does send a signal to people that are in that camp. And, I can understand why we've really benefited, and we'll hear from Colm O'Shea later, right? We've really benefited from what I call low rent energy. Very, very relatively cheap energy, right? And the reality is that that should we want to reduce our emissions, we need to build different infrastructure, and that has a cost to it, of course. So with Donald Trump not being there, actually the US Senator for California, Gary Newsom, is at Berlin.
And he's very concerned.
And he's very concerned, of course. Yeah. And of course, he's making a political statement, of course, by doing this. And I personally believe we're in a transition, right? So we need to think about both. We need to be sensible with our policy, and we'll hear this from Colm O'Shea as well. We need to be really sensible how we enact and transition, because policy, as we're going to see, as we discussed today, really does impact the price. And this show's about affordability. So we really want to do things in a sensible way, because actually, when we see that spiral on the screen just now, it's really intangible, isn't it? Okay, if I was in Jamaica, it wouldn't be intangible.
We can acknowledge it. It's knowing what to do about it, isn't it? Okay.
Yes.
Let me bring you right to our second talking point this week, which is here in the UK, as we record this show, we're still 2 weeks out from our budget.
Yeah.
But I've never known a budget with more speculation about what a chancellor will or will not do. What's the buzz around energy and what it's going to cost you and me as consumers? Are you hearing anything?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got on screen here the FT's response or prediction that Rachel Reeves is going to very seriously look at bringing energy bills down. And again, I think it's very important. Energy bills at the moment, the tariff, the price cap for energy bills is around about £1,700 per annum for electricity and heating for a standard 3-bedroom house in this country. That is almost double what it was 15, 20 years ago. That really is important. It's politically important. It's important for individuals. It's unaffordable. And
a portion of that is tax, right? Which is her thing. So she does have a lever she can pull. Make it worse, make it better.
Yep, absolutely.
By a measure.
Absolutely. And I think...
What's your sense, Julian? Is she going to do it or not?
I think she will cut back VAT, because Labour's big mandate is to run the renewables, because long term it should be cheaper, but in the near term we've seen costs come in to the bill. So VAT, I think, will be reduced. And I think green levies will be reduced. And if we think about VAT on that £1,700, that's about £90 a year, right? So that's not insignificant. And then the green levies are around about £170 a year. So those two things combined, if she was to reduce them completely, and we are speculating here, that's £250. So we bring that price cap down effectively to £1,500 a year. So it's a substantial decrease, but it's not back to where we were 15 years ago.
Okay. Let's talk about diesel prices, shall we? Because right now, diesel prices are going higher at the pumps. I don't know if you've noticed, because they creep up, don't they, by a penny or two a week. Why is that going on? I thought there's lots of crude lying around the world.
Right, yeah, that's a really good question. So actually, as part of answering your question, let me just draw watchers, listeners to the slide we've got on the screen here. This is freely available on our website, and you can track your diesel prices and gasoline prices here in the UK at the pump price. And prices last week, the average price was £1.43 at the pump. On average, varies depending which pump you're going to, where you are in the United Kingdom, but on average, £1.43. At the moment, spot markets are around about £1.48 equivalent right now. And that price rise has been driven by a couple of things, I think. And it's always difficult to be absolutely definitive, but I think we're coming into winter. Winter is predicted to be very cold in the Northern Hemisphere this year.
Blame the meteorologists for that.
Yeah, we're going to blame the meteorologists for that. And you might also say, well, hang on a moment, you're just talking about global warming. Cold. But actually, global warming predicts that we'll have extreme changes as well as a trend upwards. Okay, so we're predicted to have a very cold winter this year. Who knows whether it will do, but that's had an impact to diesel prices, heating oil prices, because they're kind of very similar products. And the other key thing that we talked about last week and the week before, was the sanctions from the United States on Lukoil and Russian. And I think Greg was mentioning that's massive, could be huge. And we're really seeing an impact on the cost of taking crude, refining that into diesel. And Lukoil has refineries in Eastern Europe, and those refineries currently aren't really selling anything. So you're finding that impact come through on diesel, and that's impacting on our diesel price here in the United Kingdom.
So
that's
the lever that's working there is the Trump sanctions, is it? It's affecting Lukoil, and that's affecting everyone.
And ostensibly they are impacting, if they are affecting this price, and it's a part of the price. I haven't said how much it is, I don't know. But it absolutely
These things have a ripple effect, don't
ripple
they?
effect
around the globe.
And what we want to add in, and Greg was saying two weeks ago, if these sanctions are really policed throughout the supply chain, and they're difficult to police that way, let's just balance that argument out. But if they are really effective, and history says they're not, right? But if they are really effective, we would start to see crude prices as well as diesel prices really escalate in value, possibly towards the $80, $90 a barrel mark. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen. That's if policing really happens. History says they are not policed that closely.
This is the UK Energy Show, brought to you by Flux, the news, information and trading platform for world energy markets from Onyx Capital Group. Now next, wind power has saved the UK energy consumer billions of pounds over the last decade or so by reducing the cost of energy we use by over £100 billion. That is a bold claim in a new piece of research which has been co-authored by a former market trader and businessman, Colm O'Shea. Colm has recently concluded a master's degree looking at the impact of the UK's nascent wind power industry, and that's had on the price of fossil fuels, in particular, the price of gas. Now, his work is presently being peer-reviewed. It does make some surprising discoveries around the ROI of existing infrastructure. So I called up Colm and asked him if he thought the financial markets had this benefit factored in.
Financial markets like electricity markets, oil markets, gas markets, they're pretty smart. I mean, those are the kind of things they use to trade, and those kind of things work things out. Where you're talking about markets, meaning, is it good to invest in a wind company that builds turbines? That's a different kind of problem, because the big problem that I'd say the renewables sector faces is that there's a massive benefit to the renewables industry that doesn't go to the people who own renewables companies. It's like the opposite of tobacco. Like tobacco companies make loads of money, and unfortunately, other people get cancer, and other people pay for those healthcare costs. Wind's like that in reverse. Is the wind companies aren't making huge profits, but what they do is they stop us, prevent us paying much more than we need to in buying imported gas.
That rather turns the argument of people being against wind or against renewables, or believing that renewables are expensive and something is going to be a long way out of reach. It rather turns that argument on its head, doesn't it?
It does, but that's why I wanted to find out the answer, because I found these debates really frustrating to listen to, because what you'd have is a skeptical person talking about money, and then a person in favour generally talking about climate change. And I thought, those arguments don't reconcile. They're not talking about the same thing at all. If someone says, I think wind is really expensive, someone else should say, I agree, or I don't, and here's why. So I wanted to find that answer. And the answer I came up with, it means that it doesn't matter if you don't believe in net zero. It doesn't matter if you think climate change is a complete hoax. You still want to have wind energy because it's much cheaper than the alternative.
Yes, and we are, I think, I know it's stating perhaps an obvious point, but as an island nation on the edge of a vast ocean that's pretty windy, we are well placed to exploit this to our own advantage, aren't we?
Hugely. But I think the thing that confuses people, and probably used to confuse me, is someone of my age, gas has been cheap my entire life. So in the 1970s, you had all this cheap gas coming in from the North Sea. And so in the 1970s, we converted everyone's house to gas boilers. In the 90s, we converted all our power stations to gas because it's the cheap thing. It all comes to the North Sea. That's fantastic. And what people don't seem to realize is that we've kind of got it all now. I mean, we now extract 10% of what we used to. And that's just geology. So these are oil and gas fields in decline. We don't have that cheap energy anymore. Texas does. We don't live in Texas. So the local energy that's cheap, which used to be gas, now the local energy that's cheap is wind. And if you still want to have gas, you've got to go and get it from Texas. And that's really expensive.
And in doing your research to build up this case, this argument, you've just made the assertion that the North Sea is to all intents and purposes exhausted. What evidence did you find for that? Because you'll be aware there's still controversy over those who think we should carry on drilling because there's still more to get out of the North Sea. What's your view?
I think a lot of this debate about licenses is a total red herring. I mean, there is gas possibly like a mile down in the North Sea, but it's so expensive to get to it that no one's going to drill for it. So you can have a really hypothetical debate in an alternative reality where someone's going to drill for very expensive gas that no one's ever going to want to burn because it's ridiculously expensive. So the gas that's easy to get at, we've got it. Norway still has some. That will also decline over the next decades. We are already importing lots of gas. Without wind, we'd be importing loads more gas. And a few licenses here or there for people that aren't ever actually going to drill for it creates a lot of political heat and a lot of anger and noise. But on both sides, I think it's just irrelevant.
And the fracking or shale gas story, did you look at that?
Yeah, it's really big in Texas. Yeah, if you watch Landman, it's really important. It doesn't mean, I don't think, Doncaster is going to turn into Texas. There is a debate about it on heat on both sides, and I don't really want to express a strong opinion. I can see both points of view. What I'm really saying is it makes incredibly little difference to the cost of your gas bill and electricity bill, because best case, we're never going to get a lot of it. Gas, if there is cheap gas in the world, it's not here. And it costs an awful lot to move a gas halfway across the world.
A reflection that's probably outside the scope of your project, but if you'd like to venture a thought, please do. And that is the way the things have worked out at the moment. It is the electricity consumer that seems to be paying levy after levy after levy, making electricity more expensive to you and me in our homes. Gas prices go high enough, but then the government or the administrators of the day explain that that's because of all sorts of the gas consumptions and the point you've made about having less North Sea gas. Is it unfortunate, unfair, or just a necessary growing pain that electricity consumers are bearing paying a heavy price just now?
I mean, it's totally counterproductive. It's policy that is contradictory. It makes absolutely no sense to pile all the taxes you can onto electricity bills, subsidize and the main thing you're doing renewables is bring down gas bills. So you have this double whammy that electricity users are paying all the costs, gas users actually get all the benefits. And the big problem is you make electricity really expensive while saying that you want to electrify the economy. You know, if you want people to have heat pumps, make electricity cheaper. And what they're doing, they're making the bills really expensive. Those are political choices. They don't come out of the economics or the finances. There are lots of things being pushed onto people's bills just because, frankly, the government wants to raise as much tax as they can, and people have to pay their energy bills. And so it's a way to raise tax. It's not a way to build an efficient energy system.
Paul Moshe speaking to me a little earlier. Some interesting research. As he says, it's being peer reviewed. So the exact numbers may pose out, but he's making this essential point that actual fact, gas prices could have been a whole lot worse had it not been for the wind infrastructure that's gone in.
Yes, that's exactly the point he's making. And you know, I really like his research because he's trying to factor over a long period of time and restructuring any major product, any major sort of infrastructure change, you need to think about it over the long term.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think he's saying he's talking about geological depletion of the North Sea, that actually that is fact. We're not Texas, where we have, and there are various basins across the United States, not just Texas, where they are fracking cheap gas. That cheap gas does make its way to the United Kingdom through LNG imports.
Okay.
But LNG imports, as Colin says in his interview there with yourself, is that's extremely expensive. Actually, it kind of sets the UK gas price today. So it costs about 2.7 pence a kilowatt to bring in here equivalently. So that's exactly where gas prices are today, right? So that actually does already happen. So we're taking cheap gas from the US and importing it from here and from Norway and also from Qatar via LNG imports, Norway via a pipeline. So that is already helping our gas network. But as he says, we've avoided having to consume that gas because to produce wind, you just need freely available wind. There is no invoice to wind once you've built one farm, right? And that's really
And he was at pains, as I was talking to him, to point out he's not actually a campaigner
No,
for either
not at
side
all.
in this. He's not pro
He's
oil.
impartial.
He's trying to be impartial as a piece of academic work. But it's interesting that maybe, and this is a sort of note to self really, as we go through this programme, that above that political noise and some real passions about the pros and cons of all this, quietly, engineers are getting on with problem solving, like how to optimise our wind in the British Isles.
Yes, and I think he makes a point. We've got a lot of abundant wind here. I think you actually raised the question, right? We're on the Atlantic. There's a big fetch.
Yeah.
We get sometimes we're very windy and probably likely to continue get more and more windy. So you know, yes, we've got that, but also we have. You know, he's talking exclusively about wind. And wind, if we do look at wind, offshore wind particularly, actually the current round of licensing to build new offshore wind is extremely expensive. It is more expensive than the current gas price. But will that stay the same long term?
It's one to watch for us.
It's one to watch.
And just an observation he made about policy. He was not getting political, but he was making a call to policy makers to make the right calls, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. And this is a really important factor. Actually, the real issues are in and around renewables, particularly in the power, the electricity renewable process, is that policies are complex, tapestry of sort of, we'll just tweak the policy here. And that filters down to the UK household buyer of electricity. So we've not done anything with gas to heat homes because our homes aren't efficient. We've left that alone. Everything's built on the electricity price. And so actually what really needs review is a very deep system-wide policy review that's updated for where we are today and where we want to go. Right.
Next up, let's have a look at what's been said on our social media channels from people who've been watching the UK Energy Show. We've got, Julian, some commentary on the Lukoil story, which loops back. A comment here about Bulgaria has only got 35 days of gasoline and some 50 days of diesel. That's just one country. But it is related to this whole Lukoil shortage we were alluding to earlier.
Yes, absolutely. There's a refinery that Lukoil own, that Lukoil are trying to sell their international assets as a result of the US sanctions. So, you know, of course, Bulgarians and Eastern Europe are impacted by that, because if it's not being able to run, there's going to be a potential shortage of refined product. And, you know, this just highlights how important refining and oil is to running economies, traveling. It lubricates economies. It's so vastly critical in terms of the energy transition, in terms of mobilization, in terms of running an economy. So yeah, I can understand their worry. What I would say in response to that is, in my experience of 35 years in the oil market, it is incredibly good at adapting. So price changes and that brings in the required. Unfortunately, that will have an affordability impact.
Okay, let's just get your take on this next post here, which is from Claire Coutinho, who happens to be, as I'm sure you know, the Conservatives' lead spokesperson, the Shadow Secretary of State for Energy. Here she is having a pop at Ed Miliband. Now he's going to lock us into higher prices for decades. She's joining a Cut My Bills campaign. The political knockabout, which we were remarking earlier in the show is not particularly helpful, continues. Inevitable, I guess.
And let's face it, it is politically sensitive. It is sensitive to UK households, 30 million households in this country, hugely important. The two things I'd really say about that is that the FT article we were looking at earlier, if it is right in its speculation that Rachel Reeves will cut VAT and adjust green levies that are on the coming through on our electricity bills, that could save up to £250 per household per year. Okay, what I would say to that, now that would get us to the £300 here, right? Almost, not far off of it. It still leaves utility bills immensely higher than they used to be. And the other key thing here is, why are we having this budget run up with the most speculation ever? Because as a country, public finances are in a dire state after the credit crunch 15 years ago, after Brexit, after COVID. We have and austerity before it, which meant we weren't really investing in infrastructure that generates tax receipts. So we don't have enough tax income. How are we going to pay for this? Is my worry, right?
Well, in 2 weeks' time, we might get a better idea.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julian, very much indeed, and thank you indeed for watching the programme. Any thoughts on what we've had to say, or our guests have had to say, do add them in the comments underneath this video, wherever you're watching. We'll see you next week.